it's my duty as a dad to love my kids and to lead them to know Jesus, and to model that for them, but also to allow my wife to show that to them as well, like that this is a partnership that we are at working together, and to see our kids grow in the faith in Jesus, and hopefully plant that seed in them that they can do that as well.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Hymnology. On today's episode, I have a special guest, Jonah Hooper. Jonah, thanks so much for joining me.
Hey man, thanks for having me on, bro. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So Jonah, just share a little bit about yourself, kind of what you do. I know you work for RUF, but kind of where are you? Kind of what do you do besides that?
Yeah, so I am a Reformed University Fellowship Campus Minister to Winston Salem State University. Of course, we are a historically Black college in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, man. Been here, just finished year 3 on campus, and it's been a fun ride, man. The last 2 years of COVID have made campus ministry really, really interesting. So, yeah, it's been good to finally have a pretty normal semester after a crazy couple years, man.
You got there 3 years ago, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so you just kind of threw you into it then, right at the beginning.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What were you doing before that?
Man, before that, so I was interning at a church, Salem Pres, here in town in Winston, doing seminary work. Before that, man, I actually was teaching music and in the public school system. So taught in middle schools, and so yeah, man, music has always been a part of my life. So yeah.
Okay. And so did you kind of feel like you were being led kind of into ministry at that point, and then you went to there?
Yeah. What my first ministry job I got actually when I was a college freshman at 19, leading worship in a little Southern Baptist church, man. It was a church plant that had started down in Eastern North Carolina. And I've always kind of felt that call to ministry, and just really, and then got married and kids, and just kind of life kind of stuff happened, and even though that pull was always there, I was just kind of praying and hoping for the day to come and that would provide that kind of opportunity, man. And RUF came along, and it's been amazing.
Yeah. So what grade were you teaching music to?
7th and 8th graders. 7th and 8th grade. So a lot of beginning band stuff, man.
Yeah.
So trying to instill that passion for music in kids, and which is weird now, man, because I have a son who's a 7th grader now, and just to see him going through that process, man, he's loves it, man. He's playing both French horn and trombone, which is like crazy.
Yeah.
But man, he loves it, and just seeing him like have that thing that's actually finally turning the light bulb on him for that he's like really, really passionate about has been awesome.
Yeah. Did you find that most of the kids that you were teaching, was there any music background, like from like elementary school and before?
Some of them, yeah. There were some kids that had kind of been involved in stuff like in elementary. Most of them actually, kind of saw people playing, music and stuff in church, and like, hey, I want to be able to do some of that. And so that was where a lot of stuff, and just like cultural, like from music and stuff on TV they're seeing. And so so it was kind of like an assortment of like where that kind of desire to do music came from.
Yeah. Okay. So were you said you were serving or you were doing internship in your church at that same time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what eventually got you to RUF?
Wow. It's weird. I don't come from a Presbyterian background at all.
Okay.
And of course, RUF is, of course, the PCA's like denominational college ministry. And so a part of kind of like the internship that I was working on was kind of like, hey, what would it mean kind of start a Bible study with students.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so I started, getting to know some students, and eventually that process kind of just led us into like doing RUF on campus. As I started brand new, kind of planting it on
Yeah.
campus. And yeah, so it's been interesting, man. I'm
Yeah.
on a campus that has never had campus ministry before. So
Okay.
like even from like administrative standpoint, it's been trying to like figure out like, hey, what is this, and what does this mean to have ministry going on, and of course like introducing it to students and fighting the culture wars. And
Yeah.
so, but yeah, man, it's been a fun ride though.
Yeah. I was wondering if Winston-Salem had an RUF before, because I know that's typically a pretty uncommon thing,
Yeah,
on
yeah.
black campuses. And I know that I mean, even me, I mean, of course, I went to a Baptist school, so we didn't have we didn't have RUF. But what was that like? Just starting that, just kind of getting into the lives of the students.
Well, I got here it started semester was fall of 2019, and
Okay.
that was it was good at
Yeah.
first. I mean, we came to campus simply with the idea of like figuring out who we needed to know, kind of getting admin's approval to be there.
Yeah.
And at least that was the idea. And we got to campus, man, and it took them like 3 months to convince them they needed to give me a parking pass. So
Yeah.
it was like that kind of like
Yeah.
real resistance of like, what in the world is going on?
Yeah.
And so I mean, it literally for the first 3 months, man, it was just like learning to have some serious faith, because I'd park my car and like, God, please let my car be here whenever I come back.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, and so I got to know a bunch of students, just trying to build some relationships and stuff.
Yeah.
And then spring 2020, the semester started, finally got first group of students together to do a Bible study. And we got to spring break, man, and in the middle of spring break, that email came out, was like, hey, don't come back to campus. And so yeah, so it was then it just turned into that real thing of like, how in the world do you do campus ministry without students on campus?
Right.
And so the last 2 years have been that roller coaster of just trying to figure out like how to do that, man. And I have students who've been in college now for 2 years, and have actually never sat in a classroom before.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been that kind of crazy.
And so this past spring semester, did you kind of see a little bit of normalcy with it?
Yeah, we finally kind of started to see normal again. So we got back to doing a Bible study on Wednesday nights, and doing a Sunday like large group worship on Sunday evenings, and doing some stuff with guys and the ladies. And man, I was able to send a student on a missions to London for a week this spring. So yeah, man, it was the first time we really got some normal back in a long time.
Yeah, that's good. And what is I've never attended an RUF and never was on a campus that had one. So really my only image of RUF is like with Kevin Twitt being over RUF, and like that's the only thing that I see. So what is RUF like as far as from a worship standpoint goes? Like your gatherings, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the best way for me to kind of see what RUF does is to in a lot of ways mirror the church on campus. And we really want to be what the church is, but bringing it to students where they are in their space, and connect them in that way. And so yeah, so our worship in large group on Sunday evenings is, I mean, it doesn't have the sacraments, but we're doing praise and worship. We're reading the scriptures, I'm teaching and preaching, kind of through books of the Bible. And yeah, so we're just learning and growing that way. So yeah, we're really seeking to worship and have that traditional kind of worship experience with them.
And the music portion of that service, is that student led, or do you lead that?
Yeah, so music has always, like I said, been a part of my life, and my wife as well. My wife's sings and is playing keys a little bit now. And so yeah, so she's kind of taking the lead on that, man. And so, yeah, it's a kind of a mixture. We have students leading as much as we can, but we also have some great families involved who kind of love us and support us as well. So my wife is leading it, but yeah, most of the stuff that's going on is by students, man.
Good. So you have, are you serving in a church right now, or is RUF your primarily kind of ministry?
Yeah, RUF it becomes, primarily where I am for
Okay.
the majority of the year. The only time I'm kind of free is during summer, and
Okay.
and that's kind of fellowshipping, in a bunch of different churches. So
Okay.
yeah.
And the reason I asked that is because I've gone back, kind of whenever we first started talking about having you on, and kind of just got on Spotify and looked up your name. There's a few places where you had where you preached before, and it looks to me like a lot of the things that you talk about are yes, campus ministry, but also kind of like the family dynamic. And I know that starting a campus ministry, that is in some ways kind of like the prequel to family ministry, so you kind of have that beginning. Do you ever dive into that with your students, like, hey, here's what the next couple of years may look like for you?
Yeah, man. You know what? One of the amazing things I think that doing ministry with college students has afforded me has been just the opportunity to be a good example for them. And so in terms of like being a model for what it means to be a husband and father, and them to see like the way I interact with my wife and my kids, and to see, and even for those young ladies to see the way that my wife kind of interacts with me, and way we kind of parent together, and but also like really like actually love Jesus together, and what worship and being faithful Christians looks like in a very like real world kind of thing. And so we love the opportunity to be able to kind of really like live out what it means to worship and be a family, and what that means.
Yeah. I guess you've only been there 3 years, so I may not have been able to see that, but have you seen that fruit come from that type of ministry with some that have gone on?
Yeah, not yet, man. Actually, because of the roller coaster that has been the last couple years, I hadn't had a senior yet. This upcoming school year will be my first set of seniors, man.
Okay, all right.
So yeah, I'm hoping I've been a good example.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We'll see when these students graduate, but yeah, man, I've worked really, really hard. Hopefully, sown some good seeds, and we'll see what the fruit is.
Yeah. So what would you say the family culture is like for most of your students that you have?
It's been good. I found that most of the students who have come and actually really, really been committed are students who have come from families where the church has been a major factor in like all of life. And so they've grown up in the church. They had mom and dad or grandparents who were really, really influential in terms of their faith journey. And so coming to college and getting connected in the RUF was almost kind of like a natural part of like that Christian, growth process. And so, but it's also been helpful because it's allowed them to kind of learn to grow and mature as Christians for themselves without having those influence of like having to go, somebody, making me go to church and be involved in worship and stuff on Sundays. And now they're figuring out, hey man, I want to do this for myself.
Yeah. And so Winston-Salem, what would you say the majority of your students are studying right now?
So the biggest degree program is nursing. And it's actually funny because of that like weird dynamic on campus. We have a campus that's about 75% female. So like it is a heavily like female dominated environment, but it's also made it a place where like students are actually serious about learning. And that's been like one of the like most helpful things for me to see is like students are really, really engaged and they're committed to like not only their education but also to their faith in Jesus.
Yeah. So, you mentioned that most of them have some type of Christian church upbringing. And the reason I ask what they're studying is because I know sometimes that can kind of make us think in a different direction.
Right.
So have you had any students that, since they have kind of gone off and gone on their own, they've kind of had like maybe a faith crisis, especially kind of with deconstruction really kind of hitting heavy right now and that kind of thing? Have you seen any of that with your students, or just on campus?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the best way to really see that has been questions with students about their gay friends, and of course on college campuses that's a very real reality, man. And so my students are like wrestling with the reality of like, how is it we serve a God who is so much about love and graciously gave his son Jesus out of a love for us, but then at the same time, like, how do my friends who say that they only want to love somebody are being forbidden from that kind of love? And so my students are really, really wrestling in a lot of ways with that kind of question. And so, so it's been a lot of like good, hard conversations about how we work through that as believers.
How do you answer that when they come to you with those kind of struggles?
Oh man.
I'm just gonna this is not what I plan on talking about, but we're gonna go down that rabbit hole and see.
I think one, it begins with understanding like the fallenness of all of humanity, and recognizing that sin is something that we all wrestle with, and so my hope is to get them to see that God wants what is best for us, and he calls us to holiness and righteousness and purity, and that of course then makes demands on the lives that we live, and what that means to be faithfully obedient to him. And so that means that there's a standard of living that he calls us to, and so we're just trying to learn to walk in that standard of righteous living, and that means protecting that purity.
Yeah, that's good. So let's just completely change the conversation just for a second, to a degree. You mentioned that most of your students are female. I want to talk to you kind of about not necessarily just fatherhood and worship, but mainly just parenting and worship.
Right.
What does that look like for you? Just you and your family? Do you guys have like a family worship time, or kind of what does your family life look like when it comes to worship?
That's a question. I'm really grateful for my dad. I learned so much of that from just having a father who modeled that for me, like really, really well. He like me was grew up in the church, and was a musician, singer, and so like ironically, so like he had my brother and sister and I, of course, all grew up as musicians and leading and doing worship and stuff in the church, and went on in kind of the pastoral ministry and stuff, and so man, I just remember like the faithful like prayers of my dad, and just even as a little boy, man, our church had so many musicians and stuff in it, and I remember just like wanting to be involved in worship, and just as a kid wanting to be one of the guys who got to play every week, and my dad was just like, hey, your gift will make room for you, the time and the season to come, and and I had to learn to wait and be patient with that, and but just like the way that he was like faithfully diligent with me at home, and he'd sit and he'd pull out his bass or sit at his keys, and I'd sit at my drums and I'd play with him, man, and so I learned so much of that with from him, and so now like to have, my own kids. I have a daughter who's 16 and my son who I talked about, who's a musician, and
Yeah.
like they're involved, of course, in like worship and the stuff that we're doing every week in RUF as well. And so yeah, it's really been about what I've learned from my dad and just trying to model that and that faithfulness of like recognizing that giftedness in them and allow them to kind of be fruitful and grow in their own way.
Yeah, that's good. And so you said your oldest is 16. It's your daughter.
16 and my son is 13. Yeah.
So I have a daughter who is about almost 7 months old.
Okay.
So I got a little while to go before I catch up with you. But and then, like I said, you mentioned that the majority of your students are female.
Yeah.
How do you, as a man, as a father, how do you try to model that for your female students or your daughter?
Yeah.
To be a leader within her home and not just say, hey, it's only the man's responsibility. Like, how do you as a man do that?
Yeah, I think the way that I learned to do that was probably to allow my wife to kind of grow and flourish and be the awesome woman of God that she is, man. And so she's been, and especially in our home, she's been the one in a lot of ways to open the word with our kids and to pray with our kids and to do that. And so, just like I think the one of the ways that I've tried to help my students see that is like allow them to see like the way not only that it's my duty as a dad to love my kids and to lead them to know Jesus, and to model that for them, but also to allow my wife to like to show that to them as well, like that this is a partnership that we are at work in together, and to see our kids grow in the faith in Jesus, and so like hopefully plant that seed in them that they can do that as well.
Yeah. What's the soundtrack of the home? What do you got? What does it sound like in your house? And what kind of music you guys listen to?
Oh man, it's funny because there is probably never a silent moment in our home, and music is always on in our house. And so yeah, man, we are in a crazy plethora of like genres of music, and of course, I mean, like a lot of Christian rap, man. We're huge like Lecrae fans and Andy Mineo and all those dudes. And but then of course, man, we're like worship stuff, huge Maverick City fans. And of course, man, growing up in the Black church, we have those and Fred Hammond and Marvin Sapp and all those dudes that we grew up listening to. And so we've been trying to like actually our worship on Sundays be like this crazy mix of like all of those influences that we kind of grew up under.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because it's like we think of, as a worship pastor, when you go to interviews for worship jobs, they will always ask you, well, do you do traditional or contemporary? And I really try to answer the question, well, I don't know. I mean, it depends on what you guys sound like,
Right.
And I think that's a good point that you make. There's more than just two options. It's what's going to get your congregation singing. And worshiping. And I think that's a good point. And to take that from what it sounds like in your home and to put it into the church context. So do you lead worship on Sunday?
No, man. So I've been playing drums, and it's mostly what my wife kind of does, like the actual like leading the worship portion. And so yeah, I play drums when I can, and focus on most of just the preaching, teaching part of it.
Cool. Well, man, if somebody wants to kind of get involved, and this is mainly for students that are in the area, what would you want to say to them as far as how they can get involved? I know it's the summer right now. But coming up, maybe for new students coming, what are some ways they can get involved with you guys as the fall semester rolls around?
Yeah, I mean, we are just looking forward to having students back, man. We've been out of school now for about 2 weeks, and I miss them so much. So I'm ready to get back to work. But yeah, so I guess the good way probably to check us out would be to ruf.org, and in the search bar, just type in WSSU. And of course, you can pull up whenever we meet and the times that we meet and where we meet on campus. I'd love to have as many new students involved, man. No, we're just learning what it means to know and to love and to enjoy Jesus together and to grow in this faithful, like, gospel-centered community.
Yeah. Well, sounds good, man. Well, Jonah, I appreciate your time, and I'm definitely praying for you in your ministry. And I hope everybody else is doing the same. So thank you all so much for joining us on this episode of Hymnology, and I hope you'll join us next time.